Rangers fans, welcome to Season 4 of Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast powered by Believe Network. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. Nick, today we'll get into a little bit of the Rangers playing the Anaheim Rangers tonight, some playoff math, and I noticed something about Matthew Robertson in that Montreal game that I wanted to highlight.
The biggest thing that happened in the hockey world over the course of the last week be Quinn Hughes getting traded to the Minnesota Wild. One of the two best defensemen in the world, maybe the best if you prefer Hughes to Makar, which I personally do. And very pointedly, the same way people you went to high school with talk about how, oh, I saw so-and-so and we were going to go out on a date and it didn't come together because, well, that's any time a star player gets traded, the Rangers are very quickly to be like, we wanted to get him too. Or like the same way we wanted to get Mike Sullivan, but he wasn't a free agent. What do you mean you wanted to get Mike Sullivan? We wanted to get Rob Brindamore. He wasn't a free agent. What do you mean? Why do you want credit for things? And the main point here isn't so much that the Rangers needed Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes is an incredible hockey player. That is not the conversation.
One of the best in the world.
I would be as comfortable as saying he would be the best player on the Rangers if they were able to acquire him. The problems are multifaceted. Number one, the Rangers don't have the assets. That's the number one most important problem as we talk about these marquee players that become available, because it looks like we're entering a new period in the league where these star players are going to leverage their way. And Quinn didn't pick Minnesota. They were probably one of many teams that made an offer, and the Canucks presented, okay, these are the options. Which one of these are you good with? Which it seems to be what happened. And the Wild sent Marco Rossi. They sent Zeev Bloom, and they sent another prospect over there. And that's a pretty good return. You got a center, and Rossi has his detractors. There are a lot of people who aren't enthusiastic about a 5'10 center who doesn't really hit a whole lot, but a skill guy. Bloom, a really highly drafted player and a first-round pick. And you talk yourself into this. Okay, well, what would the Rangers have package been? And I couldn't help but giggle as I read Vince say, they would have sent Lafreniere and Braden Schneider, and Patrick Alvin farts into the phone before Drury finishes saying Lafreniere. Look, I think Lafreniere is a redeemable player. I think he's a fine middle sixer. Schneider, I've never seen the vision for, but hockey people like him a lot more, so whatever. The Rangers don't have the guys. And that's the problem here. Matthew Tkachuk trade. Do you have a Jonathan Huberdeau? Do you have a Mackenzie Weegar? That's the problem the Rangers have here, because as we've discussed ad nauseum over the last 2 years or so, the Rangers do not have the high-end talent. That is the beginning and end of the conversation, in particular at forward. While building a team around Hughes, Fox, Gavrikov would have been really interesting, it would have been a real counterpunch to where most of the league is going, where they're spending more on forwards, at least you could have talked me into, okay, they're going to have two of the 4 or 5 best defensemen in the entire world, one of the 5 best defensive defensemen in the league, and they are going to control games from the back end, and they are going to be a kind of a throwback style team in that respect. But if you were to do that, you would be losing a top 6 forward, and we already have had Connor Sheary in the top 6 all year. Who's going to fill in that other spot? You probably would have had to throw Perreault in the trade because the Rangers' assets at face value were not as good. And this is a multi-layered problem. Not only could the Rangers not make a great offer, even if they could have made a great offer, it would have arguably put their team in a worse overall position. And it really emphasizes the point here. You need high-end talent to be successful in this league. It is really hard to acquire, which is why it's so valuable. And if you don't have the assets or the cap space, and the Rangers will have cap space next summer, that wasn't as much of a concern. If you don't have the assets, you can't go get these guys because you're not getting to free agency. Now, if I were Quinn's agent, I would be telling him we're getting to free agency no matter what. You're going to be the first $20 million player in this league. Even if it means we're going to Calgary, we're going to get as much money as we possibly can out of this. But that's not the way the league works. That's not the way players' priorities work. And it sucks to sit here, and I hate to say the Rangers are getting back to what they were in the 2010s, because they've gotten some guys in free agency, Trocheck, Gavrikov, but for much of the 2010s, the Rangers were linked to anybody with a pulse, and they were never actually in. The one that always comes to mind was the Stamkos free agency year where he ultimately went back to Tampa. But I remember watching the TSN stream that day, and Bob McKenzie was like, don't count out the Rangers. And the Rangers were like $1.5 million over the cap, and they were going to make an offer for Steven Stamkos. But that's kind of what it feels like the Rangers are now, especially for any of these people with USA Hockey connections like Quinn Hughes, like a Tage Thompson and Alex Tuck. Chris Drury, that connection there is always going to be played upon. Bill Guerin, of course, is the GM of USA Hockey, went out and got Quinn. But sitting here, it feels like the Rangers are going to continue being second and third choices in all of these trade opportunities because they just don't have the pieces.
Well, the idea of Quinn Hughes on the Rangers would be fantastic. Obviously, he's one of the best defensemen on the planet, and no one's going to argue that. The problem, as you highlighted, is the number one reason why Quinn Hughes is not a Ranger right now is because the Rangers simply do not have not nearly the trade offer that Minnesota had. Point blank, the Wild traded essentially 4 first-round picks, including Zebullium, who's supposed to be a blue chip prospect, and Marco Rossi, who's he scored 60 points last season. Like he was struggling a little bit this year, but he's a 60-point player already, and he's still 24, I think he is. So he's still got room to grow in Vancouver. So Vancouver got a haul, and if you're a Canucks fan, if you are a part of Canucks management, you are never going to be as satisfied with, getting 3 quarters and 2 dimes for Quinn Hughes for a whole $1. But you made out with essentially the best offer, the best return that you could have hoped for in that kind of trade. Nobody, if you're trading one superstar away for multiple different pieces in a trade, you very rarely, if ever, win that sort of trade. Vancouver did essentially the best that they could in given their position. The Devils, as we've read in recent days after the trade now, did not have the assets to, like, the Devils couldn't do it, and they also didn't
have the cap space. That's the other thing.
Sure, but with enough,
they could have conceivably Nemec, Mercer. That's enough for me. I would have been okay with Nemec as my Bloom facsimile.
Maybe.
Mercer has a 60, 70 point season. He's close enough to Rossi. I know he's not much of a center. He hasn't done that a lot, but the Devils more so seen money wise.
The Canucks needed a center.
Yeah, they did. That was their sticking point. And I as much as I've complained about JT Miller this year, they traded for Hedl with the press idea that he would be their second line center, and that obviously hasn't worked out because of the injuries.
Right. With what they got, this was essentially best case scenario. Like the reports are coming out, right, that Quinn Hughes was not going to sign in Vancouver. They knew this for a while, and they had to, like, this was, the clock was ticking. You had to trade Quinn Hughes, and the longer you waited, it almost kind of flipped on Vancouver, where you kind of were losing your leverage as time was going on because your team kept losing, and teams were kind of figuring out, this guy's not signing an extension. Like, this guy's not going to stay in Vancouver. So, now trade, like, that's why trading Quinn Hughes now makes a little more sense than, because with a lot of these kinds of names, people always assume, why not wait till the trade deadline? All these things. And for a lot of players, there is more leverage and there is more people fighting for, your assets at the deadline. But also at the same time, like, let's say you just don't get a good offer for Quinn Hughes at the deadline. Then what? Like, let's say this is your best offer right now, and then you wait 3 months until March 5th or whatever is at the deadline, and you don't get this offer. Okay, well, now you have Quinn Hughes. Now you have to trade him for, for 2 quarters and a nickel instead of $1 or 95 cents. And now the fan base is very mad. I mean, the fan base is mad, but at least there's, one, the understanding that Quinn Hughes wasn't going to stay. 2, okay, you got a lot in return for this guy. And there's still a lot of pushback. There's still a lot of hatred as to, why couldn't you build a team around a 26-year-old, guy in his prime who is one of the best players in the world at his position? The anger is more at, management as opposed to the trade itself. You get to March and you get maybe 2 prospects and a second-round pick for Quinn Hughes, and the entire fan base is going to be, in flames. So for what it's worth, Vancouver did get a lot. Minnesota is going to be – I think they're going to be scary now Like Minnesota has always been this team that's been not good enough to get to the later rounds in the playoffs, but also not bad enough to really, tank for first overall picks. They've been in purgatory pretty much their entire existence. So for Bill Guerin to say, okay, I've had enough of this, I'm going to go all in and acquire an elite superstar player to play on this team when, with this window that we have, with Kaprizov, right? With Gustafsson, with Wallstedt, with Brock Faber. Now this team becomes, this could be something now. So I think, Minnesota wins here. Vancouver got what they could out of this. They squeezed as much juice out of this trade as they could. And, we'll see what happens now.
So going off of this, there were two other things I wanted to hit on in there because you brought something up and I think it's an interesting conversation. It's basically impossible to win the superstar trade as the team trading away the superstar. That just doesn't happen in this league. It's not like the Shea trade is out there. You're not going to get 6 first-round picks for Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and destroy the league in the process. But you think about where some of these teams are at, and you mentioned Minnesota, who have been in purgatory for a while. I would say the Heat is definitely increasing, is fair to say, on Bill Guerin, who's been there for, I think it's 5 years now. He took over in 2020 at this point, and they've hung around. They've never been bad. They've never really bottomed out, been a lottery team. They've always ended up running into the team that just is better than them, and sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. The thing I wanted to broach on, so I pulled up a list of trades over the last 10 years or so. Rantanen, it feels like Colorado got more established pieces because Nature's is going to be like a 90, 100-point guy this year. Granted, he gets to play with McKinnon, so it's a little bit easier for me to say Nature's definitely works out there. But that one, Colorado did reasonably well, but Jack Drury's only a fourth-line center. Beyond that, Ryan O'Reilly to the Blues, to the Leafs, the 1-for-1 of Weber and Subban, Huberdeau, McKenzie for Huberdeau, Uyghur for Kachuk. The Eichel trade to Vegas, where they got the Sabres got Tuck and some other pieces. There's not really a good example of this where this works out for you. You think about in the NBA, you can trade the star player and kind of make it work for you because you just get so much volume. In the NHL, it's really hard to make this work for you as the team trading the superstar away, just because it is so hard to get one of those guys. Basically, the only way is to pick in the top 5, and their development goes perfectly. That's the real conundrum you have here if you were a team like Vancouver. You drafted Elias Pettersson, and that was the other thing I wanted to touch on, and it just jogged my memory. You think about where the Canucks were 2 years ago with Pettersson, JT Miller, Quinn Hughes, and their defense we all knew was a little suspect, but Demko's a good goalie. You had Brock Besser. You had a nice core of guys. And within 2 years, you're basically down to the studs. I mean, I went to the Canucks-Devils game yesterday, and there were maybe 6 guys on the Canucks I recognized. These are tough times for an organization that they had 2020, they had 2 years ago, and that's all they have to show since that Stanley Cup final against the Bruins all those years ago. That is a really tough franchise, and I think a lot of it comes down to the stuff we complain about a lot with the Rangers, where they prioritize, we want size, we want experience. And you look at some of the contracts they've thrown out or players they've traded for over the years, whether it's Evander Kane, whether it's Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Connor Garland, who's been decent for them, but he's expensive for what he is. You think about that Jay Beagle contract they gave Beagle after the Capitals won the Cup. And that's how you speedrun falling apart, is when you're overpaying third and fourth liners by $500,000, $750,000, $1 million, and you do that for 4 or 5 guys, really quickly it adds up. And I'm not saying the Rangers are that doomed. They've got better pieces to orient themselves around. But that's your cautionary tale, what's going on in Vancouver. Whether or not Alvin can withstand this and really get to keep the train on the tracks for an extended period of time is a different conversation. But you look at some of these teams that thought they were really close and where they are now, it's a humbling place to be. And if you read Thomas Drance, if you read some of the Sportsnet stuff from Canada, a lot of the Canucks people feel like 2 years ago is what they actually were. And the last year and a half, 2 years have been a vibes problem. That's why they got rid of JT Miller. That's why they made such a concerted effort to bring the guys in they have over the last year and a half or so. and it just hasn't worked. It's great that you've changed the team, but just changing things for the sake of change doesn't necessarily commiserate with success. And it's crazy. You lost 3, because Horvat's having a nice year for the Islanders too. You've lost 3 top 50 players in a year and a half, 2 years? No, 3 years ago for Horvat. 3 top 50 players in the league that you tank years to get an Elias Pettersson type player. They gave up a lot to get JT Miller, and now the Canucks have nothing.
The Canucks doing what they did kind of reminds me of what doctors did in the, like 500 years ago, where no one really knew the solution to things. People just
we're
kinda
doing
guessed.
Leeches?
Yeah,
is
like
that what
leeches,
the Canucks are doing?
Like bloodletting, like all of these, solutions that they think is right, but is actually not rooted in any kind of factual evidence, like at all, right? But that's what they knew at the time, so that's what they, that's what they did. This is a lot of what the Canucks are doing, essentially, where they don't really understand what's going on, but they're trying to do something and just kind of seeing what's going on based off their knowledge, right? Like, the worst kind of problem to have if you're a general manager is when you have a team that is talented on paper, but something isn't going right. Something. Because that problem is very difficult to diagnose. And that's what I mean by, like the Canucks are kind of doing what, medieval doctors used to do. Because you're guessing. It is, when you're a really good team that's losing 7-6 every game because your goalie stinks, that problem is easy to diagnose.
Just trade for Tristan Jarry. It's easy.
Right,
that's all you
exactly.
Gotta do.
Right. That really worked for them. But, hey, they beat Toronto, and by the way, all 3 goals that Jarry gave up weren't really all that good. But anyway, I digress. But, when you have a team like the Canucks where, okay, your roster is pretty decent, or at least better than the record showed, and yet there just seems to be something ethereal that is either clouding this team, or there's something that is non-diagnosable, or at least directly, that is impacting the way the team plays on the ice. And that is very difficult, nearly impossible to diagnose and fix, especially on the fly. And so, with Vancouver, their solution to the problem was, okay, well, we got to trade JT Miller. We got to make a bunch of these, we got to fix this team. JT Miller's the problem. Okay, well, clearly I don't think that was the case, judging by the Canucks currently being the worst team in the NHL. But that was what they thought was right. Obviously, didn't work out for them, but it's an unenviable situation to be in if you're a part of Vancouver management, because you thought that, okay, well, in this kind of black shadow, this black smoke of what could possibly be the reason why your team isn't playing well, maybe this is the solution. Okay, we're going to go all in on this solution. It didn't work. And now you're stuck holding the bag with a team that all they do right now is lose. And it's not really getting any better at Vancouver, and it's tough.
All right, so pivoting this conversation directly to the Rangers, because we are a Rangers podcast.
Of course.
The main point isn't so much that the Rangers just couldn't get Quinn Hughes even if they wanted to. It's also that I would argue they are more than a Quinn Hughes away from where they would like to be. And that's kind of the root of the issue. And we can start talking about the games they've played recently off of this as well, because it's not like the Rangers are playing terrible hockey. They are in a majority of these games. They are playing really good team defense, even without Adam Fox for the most part, even though their numbers are trending down last 10, 15 games. It's still reasonable to say in the aggregate overall, they're playing reasonable team defense. But you look at where they're at in the standings, and we'll talk about that later. You'll look at the teams they're in competition with right now, and it just, it's missing things. The team is missing things. It's missing, without Fox, 2 defensemen. Even with Fox, they're missing at least 1 top 6 forward, if not 2. And we keep framing these conversations around, well, if they could get player X, if they could get player Y. And I really do think that it's so much more than just 1 or 2 guys, because you look at where the issues are. The power play is a joke at this point. It is non-existent. You look at who is producing.
They got 2 power play
counts.
goals against Montreal.
They did. Montreal's in a weird spot. I watched them against the Oilers last night too. They play very weird. They don't play a lot of defense, but their defensive numbers aren't terrible. Montreal's a funky team, but the Rangers' power play has been pretty bad all year. Their star players are playing okay, if I'm being generous. Otherwise, I would say they've been below average. They are relying a lot on toughness, on grit, on winning puck battles, on playing a certain style of hockey. And it's going to keep them in a lot of games. They do deserve credit for that. I mean, I definitely entered the season with quite a bit of skepticism that Mike Sullivan was going to be able to coax a bunch of guys into playing hockey a way they haven't before. And they have. They have played pretty reasonable team hockey for most of this season, but they're 20 goals to 40 goals short of where they would probably like to be offensively. And some of that we'll talk about in regards to Chris Kreider, who's having a nice season so far. And just, this team is missing guys. They made one aggressive move in the offseason in Gavrikov, and then Radish, Rempe extension, Sheary PTO. And I'm not saying the silver bullet fix to your team was out there, but there's a non-zero chance. And I get the vibes, and we'll talk about Kreider in a minute, but you had the money if you wanted to keep Kreider and try and put the pieces back together. But I get why they didn't.
It's, again, another, I don't want to say unenviable position, but it's, you trade. We talked about this for weeks and months now on the show, where if you trade away a goal scorer like Chris Kreider, even with, his injuries and us ultimately thinking it was for the best given everything that's happened, and, okay, it was time to trade Chris Kreider. Okay, sure. If that was the case or not, you did it. If you're going to do that, though, you have to at least try to replace the goal scoring.
Yeah.
And when you don't do that, you cannot be surprised when you get into the season and lo and behold, you can't score goals or at the rate, at the pace that you did before. You took away a guy that was, ultimately very good for at least let's say 20 goals, 25 goals.
Yeah, sure.
For the whole, for the season. You subtract that from your goal record, and you do not feasibly replace that with someone that you can reliably count on to deliver similar results. And what happens now is you are playing Connor Sheary, who has 1 goal. It's December 15th. He has 1 goal. In your top 6. And again, I said this last week, Connor Sheary's doing a lot of small things very well. He was the catalyst. I forget which goal it was against Montreal, but he was the catalyst that won the puck battle, that got it back. I think it was the JT Miller tying goal, if I'm not mistaken, where he got the puck in the corner. He got it back to the blue line. I think Matthew Robertson shot the puck, and the rebound went to JT Miller, who beat Fowler 5-hole. I think that was Sheary, if I'm not mistaken. But he is doing a lot of those little things that is positive for the Rangers. He is really annoying to play against, and he's the puck retriever on that line, and he's doing a good job of it. The problem isn't Connor Sheary in and of itself. It's the fact that you are playing somebody in your top 6 who 2 months into the season has 1 goal. You never replaced Chris Kreider, and that is what you're doing on your second line. If Connor Sheary had 1 goal on the third line doing what he's doing, it's okay, well, I wish he could have scored a couple more, but he's doing a lot of good things, right? And, there's a Kreider replacement scoring a bunch of goals in the top 6, so it's okay. That's not happening. So that puts a lot more spotlight on that line, even if they're doing a lot of things correctly, even if they are driving possession. It doesn't, score wise, if you are not scoring goals, ultimately all the little things that you're doing kind of falls to the wayside because you are not putting the puck in the net. So when you trade away Chris Kreider and you don't replace him, this is what happens.
In addition, going off of that, I wanted to talk about, it's not even just they failed to replace them. It's that they didn't even present a discernible plan. It would be one thing if we came into the year and they said, we know Gabe Perreault or Brennan Othmann might need a little bit more time, But we have an opportunity here for someone to come in and seize it. And if somebody plays themselves into this role, we think that they, even if they don't reach their full ceiling in their first year, if we can facsimile 10 goals out of Perreault, 3 or 4 out of Othmann, 4 or 5 out of Berard over the course of the entire season, okay, you got to 20. Now, you would probably need closer to 30, but at least you could have sold me on, okay, positive regression, young guys, more opportunities, better use cases. And basically nobody's doing great counting stats-wise in relation to their career averages other than Panarin, and Panarin's a lot more assists than goals right now. But you never really, and that's the other conundrum the Rangers have, which gets to the idea of why they need more high-end talent. They don't get bottom 6 offense. They just don't. And that puts every single game on their top 6 to give them the 3 or 4 goals they need to win games, because as we know, they've had a really rough power play this year. And that's what swings these games so much for them, and why it feels like you really don't have a great feel for this group. It's not that they play terrible. It's that they are pretty much incumbent upon 4 or 5 guys producing 80 to 85% of the offense. And on the nights where they can't do that, they don't win. It really is that straight up. And they're not playing bad defensively. They're not getting bad goaltending. They just are struggling to find ways to score. And this is a scoring sport. You need to score more goals than the other team if you would like to win. Yes, I know that's obvious, but sometimes I'm not sure the Rangers are aware of this. And I want this team to get that extra juice. And that's the thing. Because with as bad as the East is right now, and we'll talk about that later, it won't take a lot to be in the playoffs. It won't take a lot to win a round this year. And I came into the year, make the playoffs, win a round, great, whatever. Feel good for the vibes. Set last year, the way the year before that ended aside. We're moving forward. We're going into the future. We are trying to still be competitive. And the bottom 6 is just pulling teeth. The defense is okay, but I'm never really feeling great about the team. And that's what's annoying.
It goes back to what we've been talking about this whole season, of the whole Jekyll and Hyde idea, right? Even in the game against Montreal, the Rangers played well for the first 12 minutes of that game. The Canadiens didn't have a single shot on goal. They were playing really well defensively. The Habs had 0 shots in the first 12 minutes, which, I mean, if there's one team that happens to in the first period of a lot of games, it's the Rangers. So the fact that they turned that around, was like, okay, well, Montreal has a lot of high-end talent, or at least high-end prospect talent, right? Like Lane Hudson, like Ivan Demidov, right? Like, Suzuki and Caulfield. And if you want to put Slavkovsky in there right now, then yeah, like him too, right? Like they have a bunch of names that can generate offense pretty much whenever they want. For the Rangers to have zero, for the Rangers to hold them to 0 shots on goal through 12 minutes, that was impressive. And then they dominated possession for a good amount of that time. They couldn't score. And then on the first shot that Montreal had, there was a defensive breakdown, and it goes into the back of the net. Okay, and it's 1-0. Okay, here we go again, right? Because soon after that, it was another defensive breakdown, and it's 2-0, and it's 3-0, and you're watching this game and you're going, "What is happening? What's happening defensively? Like, what are these breakdowns?" And Jack Hahn put out a couple of tweets about it, because the Rangers were playing zone defense, and the Montreal Canadiens were destroying that in the first period. They were skating. So it was clearly something that Marty St. Louis and his coaching staff looked at when they were previewing the Rangers. Like, okay, like this team is playing zone defense. This is how you go about it. And for the first period, it worked. What ended up saving the Rangers essentially was the power play. They scored that first goal, and then Dobson, hooked Panarin on the breakaway. He scored on that breakaway. All of a sudden, on the penalty shot, like 20 seconds later, and all of a sudden, you go from a 3-0, another deflating, another embarrassing period at home, to wait a minute, okay, the fans are back in it. We have a hockey game again. And then you get to the second period, and Montreal scores again, and you're thinking, okay, well, like, what is this team going to do now? And then they scored the third goal, and they scored the fourth goal. And then, they got the power play in the overtime, and then JT Miller won it, which isn't for what it's worth. The Canadians, I think, had 17 total shots on goal. I know Shesterkin didn't have the best counting stats game, right? When you give up 4 on 17, it doesn't look good on paper. But feasibly, you watch that game, watch those 4 goals, and you tell me how many of those 4 goals, like Patrick Waugh would have saved, Dominik Hasek would have saved. And I'm not trying to defend he didn't have the best game. For sure. He didn't have a phenomenal game. And I'm not here to say that he had zero blame in those 4 goals. There was maybe 1 or 2 that he probably had a shot at that he probably should have stopped. But overall, the defense was not there enough to protect Shesterkin in those types of situations, even if, for the most part, they kind of limited Montreal in all other aspects of generating offense, which was good. Okay, well, you got 5 goals against Montreal. You have 4 games this week, which is kind of crazy to think about because Rangers have played more games than anybody. And the NHL was like, oh, well, why don't you just keep doing that? Why don't you just keep playing as many games as you possibly can every week until February, and then you maybe might see the ice once every 6 weeks.
The schedule is going to be really rough. I've been thinking about it a lot over the last few weeks because we are in a compressed schedule before the Olympics, and most teams are playing pretty much 4 games a week right now, where pretty much everybody's having at least one back-to-back, if not every week, every other week. And I'm very curious to see how teams hold up under that duress. I'm very curious to see how the teams who have a lot of guys who go to the Olympics fare versus the ones that don't. It is in the back of my mind. I think the Rangers schedule starting out the way it was split, where a lot more road games than home games. I think there are a lot of those little circumstantial factors for as far as the schedule goes that are worth considering. But you alluded to it, and we can talk about it now. The playoff math isn't bad. That's what's annoying about this. The Rangers are not going to need a whole lot for them to go right. Right now, they have 36 points through the games they've played. In the 33 games they've played, they're on pace for 89.5 points. We're talking about a 5-point gap between what's probably the last wild card and where they're at right now. 3 extra wins? That's not crazy. That's not out of the realm of possibility that they can get those 3 wins. And yes, I know more likely than not, if they're one of the last 2 wild cards, they're going to have a tough matchup in the first round, and they probably get bounced in the first round. Whatever. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. I don't want to be too doomerist, too nihilist before we even consider if they actually get into the playoffs. But the math is not that hard. And then the teams they're in competition with, the Penguins, who we assume are going to continue to sell off pieces as the year goes along, the Bruins, who I do not understand how they're winning hockey games, the Flyers, who are basically just Trevor Zegras and Dan Vladar,
sure.
The Capitals, who have bounced back after a really crappy start, the Islanders, who score a ton of goals but give up a ton of goals, and then Carolina, who's we know a good regular season team. They're not in exactly competition with the Central or the Pacific. This is very doable. The Rangers aren't going to play incredible hockey the second half of this year to make a real run of this. Yeah, would you like them to be capable of a deep playoff run? Sure. But as far as just making the playoffs, the math is very doable, and the competition's not good. You should be able to leapfrog Pittsburgh, Boston, and the Flyers, at minimum, and the Islanders. Sure. The Rangers have more talent than all 4 of those teams. That's not a tall order, and if you leapfrog all 4 of those teams, you're in the playoffs. That's not unreasonable, and I do think, and we've said this a lot, if they can't make the playoffs for the second straight year with the circumstances the way they are, I think that's a terrible look for everybody. They're not – if they were in the Central – and it was Minnesota, Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg. Okay. I know the Rangers aren't as good as those teams. Okay. You're talking about we need to be better than Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, who both entered the year hoping to be in the Gavin McKenna business. The Islanders, who picked first overall last year and would love to be in the Gavin McKenna business. Those are 3 teams you need to be able to be better than. I'm not asking a lot here. I'm not saying be better than Carolina or the Devils or Florida or Tampa Bay. Be better than the teams you're supposed to, and then we worry about the chips where they fall.
Well, we kind of had that argument last year too, right? Where the point of a lot of the episodes last season were the East is bad, besides Florida.
Oh, incredibly bad.
everybody besides Florida was bad or beatable, right?
Yes.
Obviously, you make the playoffs on a bad team, but they're not a super scary juggernaut dominant team like Florida was. All you got to do is make it, and you have a chance of really getting somewhere. And they kept fumbling the bag, and then they lost, and then make the playoffs. Okay, well, now the East is still not great. There's still no team that really scares you. And Florida, who, they're better the past couple of weeks, but half their team is still hurt. Barkov, I think, is coming back maybe a month from now or something like that. They're starting to maybe get a little bit healthier as the season goes on, but they're still banged up, and they're not the team that they were last season from a health perspective. And also, you make it to a cup final and then back-to-back cup wins, that is going to take a massive toll on your body. So the team right now, they're playing slightly better, but they're still dealing from all of that stress on their body the last 3 years. And that makes a whole lot of sense. So right now, as of December 15th, there is no team in the East that you can look around and say, okay, this is the best team in the conference. There is no team that is head and shoulders above everybody else that you go, okay, well, we don't have to worry about anybody except for that one team. There's a lot of, potentially scary teams. Tampa Bay is still, of course, around, and Carolina is always going to win a bunch of regular season games until it gets to, the conference finals, and then they'll never win a game if they get there. The Islanders are playing very fast, and I wrote about this for NY Hockey Now, I think on Saturday. The Islanders they might not have the name recognition on their roster, but they are using their speed. They're one of the fastest teams in the league, and they are one of the best teams in the league at generating offense off of that speed. So that's how they're hurting teams. They have 100 goals through 33 games. By the way, the Rangers have 88 goals scored in 33 games, which is the lowest in the Eastern Conference by 8 goals. Columbus, who can't stop a beach ball, that's why they're losing a bunch of games, they have 96 goals for in 32 games. The worst team in the East right now has scored more goals than the Rangers have, who have 4 more points right now than Columbus. But the point now is, okay, well, all you have to do is get there, because there isn't a team right now that is differentiating themselves from the rest of the pack. The pack is as tight as it gets. The bottom of the conference with Buffalo, Ottawa, which that's kind of unexpected, and Columbus, which I think is unexpected too. I thought Columbus was going to be better than what they are. All 3 teams have 32 points. The Rangers have 36 points. The wild card, both teams in the wild card cutoff right now with Philadelphia and Boston have 38 points. The East is as close as it gets right now, 2 months in the season, and yet there still isn't a team that's like the Colorado of the East, where they're just winning everything. There isn't that team. Just get there. But right now they're not in it. That could change, in 2 days. If they can beat Anaheim, and if they can beat who are they playing after that? Vancouver, if they win those 2 games, then they're going to be in a playoff spot. It comes down to, okay, well, you got to get these points, especially against these 2 opponents. And I know Anaheim is a good team. There's going to be a lot of emotion here, but you have to beat Vancouver. You have to beat Vancouver. If you get, maybe hopefully a point against Anaheim, I can live with that. You have to get at minimum 3 points out of this back-to-back, and then we can start talking about playoffs.
So you alluded to it. We could start talking about Kreider and Trouba now. So I said it before, and I know sports don't work like that. It's not like kids who have a fight in 5th grade and you sit them down and you say, hey, you guys are friends. Why are you guys fighting? There probably wasn't coming back from the way last year went with Kreider. There definitely wasn't with Trouba, because Trouba is a little passive-aggressive and likes to talk about things out of context and occasionally just lie through his teeth and say, oh, yeah, and Detroit was never going to trade for me. Okay. But the main point here, as far as Kreider and Trouba go, when it comes to Kreider, and look, I can say this because I have been a Kreider's kind of overrated guy for a long time, and I've always felt that Ranger fans are very guilty of always overrating our own guys. But when you look at Kreider's numbers, especially in the context of the franchise's history, in the era he's played in, this is a guy who almost certainly will get his number retired, and if not, it would be a real point of contention. A really important player during an interesting, arguably the best period in the history of this team. I know they didn't win any Stanley Cups, obviously, during Kreider's tenure, but you look at the window of hockey the Rangers played from 2010 through 2024, and in terms of playoff series wins, regular season wins, probably the single most successful period in the history of the franchise, which dates back 100 years. And this was the guy who was here through it all, who jumped onto the team as an 18-year-old and left the team over the summer with gray in his beard. This is the type of guy you envision playing his entire career with your team. And it sucks things ended the way it did. I do think that if the organization was a little more amicable and a little less bull in a china shop, there probably was a way to make this work. But now you sit here and look, I'm not going to subscribe a whole lot into the Ducks bouncing back. I think it was a matter of time before some of their prospects eventually popped off. If the Rangers had a Leo Carlsson for Chris Kreider to play with, I'm sure the numbers would have been a little more palatable last year. But it sucks he's gone. The Trouba stuff will be overblown because he was the captain, whatever. But Kreider's
he threw helmets, Nick. I don't know if you knew that.
He checks the anecdotal boxes, not the actual hockey boxes. That's the point here. Kreider, really good player for a long time. It sucks it ended the way it did, and it didn't need to end that way, which I think is a real sore spot for a lot of people, me included. And I'm not even the biggest Kreider guy. I just wish there was a way they could have found a way to make it work, because they need that goal. They need that offense. They need those 20 to 30 goals right now. It is the most glaring hole in this team.
Well, yeah, we just talked about it a few minutes ago. The Rangers traded away a certified at minimum 20-25 goal scorer, and they replaced him with somebody in the top six that currently through 2 months has 1 goal. And that anybody in the league could tell you that, like, if you go around and you ask anybody in the league, hey, what do you think is the biggest problem with the Rangers right now? They would all look at, like, what is your top six? Like, your top six is obviously, you need more depth scoring, sure, but you pay guys to be in your top six because they produce the most. And you have a guy, again, with 1 goal in 2 months playing a top six. So when you trade away a guy like that and you don't replace him with anybody that can produce at a reasonably similar level, this is the kind of offensive production you're going to get. You're going to be trying to get every last drop out of Panarin and Miller and hopefully Trocheck and hopefully Lafreniere and hopefully Will Cooley and hopefully, whoever else. And you're just kind of waiting around and hoping. There's a lot of hope that I just said. A lot of hopium, a lot of copium, a lot of whatever you want to use, to describe what I just said. And that therein lies the biggest, reason as to why the Rangers have 88 goals through 33 games, the lowest in the entire conference, one of the lowest in the entire league. I mean, there's only like a couple of teams that have a couple less goals. Like, even like the worst team is Seattle at 74, who genuinely right now wouldn't be able to score on me or you, which is a problem for them. But the Rangers are not far off a couple like St. Louis and LA that somehow LA is in a playoff spot, despite, again, not being able to score anything. But when you get to the playoffs, scoring becomes harder. I'm not breaking any news here, but scoring in the regular season should be the easy part. Scoring in the playoffs is harder to do. So if you cannot score in game 34 or, 34 through games 1 through 33 have been a challenge to put the puck in the net. Which is a reasonable sample size at this point. It's a third of the season. It's more than a third of the season, actually. We're almost at the halfway point of the season. You just can't score goals. So if you can't score goals for almost half of an entire season, what is going to happen when you get to the playoffs? Think of it that way. The Rangers, let's say they're in a wild card spot and they may be like light buyers and they try to fill, with maybe a couple middle six guys, or I don't think they go for a top six guy given their standings right now. We'll see what happens in 2 months. But, I would wager that they'll trade for maybe a couple of guys just to fill out the offensive production a little bit, which should help. But, okay, even then, if you couldn't generate offense for half of a season and you add a couple of guys that maybe can help with that a little bit, that's going to help in the aggregate. But game to game, come playoff time, are those guys going to help you generate more offense? Because you can't do it in October, November, December. How are you going to do it in April, May, and June?
That's the real conundrum of it all, because I'm trying so hard, Andrew, to not get caught up in the fact that if they make the playoffs, they're going to be cannon fodder, that they're going to be in it. You know what it's going to be exactly like? It's going to be like watching the John Tortorella 2011 Rangers in the playoffs, where every game will be 2-1 or 3-2. They will entirely come down to, can the Rangers generate a breakaway or a power play goal? And those will be the only paths to victory, because they will play good team defense. They will hold up in these games. If I had a game for my life, I would take Shesterkin and I would feel okay about it. But if you cannot score, you end up like those Tortorella teams where you're dependent on the Carl Hagelin breakaways, the Derek Brassard slap shot breakaways, and the Rangers don't have foot speed to generate breakaways. They don't. Noah Laba, as good as I have found him to be this year, he's not somebody I'm counting on to be a dominant force with his foot speed. That's the problem when it comes to being so dependent on, we need breakaways and we need power play goals. Those are such small components of the game. If you have a good game, you might be able to generate 2 or 3 odd man rushes, maybe 4 or 5 if you have a really good game. You're going to get 4 or 5 chances and then maybe 2 power play attempts, and that's what we're going to hinge our playoff hopes on, is 7 scoring chances over the course of an entire game. That's the problem at hand. They're not bad, but they're not bad, but they're also not very good.
No, but I wanted to mention this as well at some point. But Matthew Robertson has, at least, in the absence of Adam Fox, tried to help with that offensive production. Because I watched him in the was it yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever it was, against Montreal, and every time he had the puck on a stick in the offensive zone, he was throwing at the net. Like, it was something that I very quickly noticed was, okay, wait, like, he's actively, like, this was how he's trying to generate something positive for this team. And but the thing about what he did was, against Montreal, at least, it worked. He generated rebounds. I think the JT Miller goal was scored off of his initial shot. Jacob Fowler, who had a good debut in the NHL, has had kind of a struggle against Rangers because he couldn't control his rebounds. And Matthew Robertson, I don't know if he noticed it or maybe somebody said something in, maybe behind the bench or whatever, but Fowler had a difficulty seeing long shots and controlling the rebounds off of long shots. So Matthew Robertson, it almost seemed like every time he had the puck on stick in the offensive zone, he would just throw it at Fowler just to see what would happen. And he generated a lot of secondary scoring based off of that, which I thought was very cool. It was okay. You bench Scott Morrow for Urho Vakanainen, who had one good play. I think it was a 2-on-1 that he skated back and he was able to stop. But other than that, just wasn't all that great in the whole of the game. But it is what it is. Okay, so you scratch Scott Morrow for Urho Vakanainen. So there goes what little offensive, secondary offensive output you had from your blue line gone. Also, at a time where Scott Morrow was actively getting more confidence, and you can see him, weaving and bobbing and weaving his way in the offensive zone with the puck on his stick. Like, he was generating more offense, but okay, you sit him for Vakanainen. So it's nice to see, with Fox hurt still for another at least few weeks, that Matthew Robertson, I don't want to say is picking up the slack, because you can't replicate what Adam Fox brings to the table, but at least offensively, Matthew Robertson is trying to fill some of that gap by, not overpassing, by understanding, okay, the goaltender that I am shooting at, this is his second or third career game. He is not controlling rebounds well. let me just fling this at the net, and somebody in front will either have a good opportunity or actually score the goal. And that's what happened. And Matthew Robertson, I want to say, was an underrated star of that game because of the way he generated offense for this team. And I really like that, and I want to highlight that. And if you go back and watch his shifts, you'll see the kinds of things the things that he was doing, which, you know, is a surprise for me. I didn't know that he could, I don't want to say generate that kind of offense, but like see the ice in that kind of way. So, and I think that is an impressive angle to think about when we talk about the defense and go, okay, at least for the time being, and hopefully this continues, and hopefully it's not just a one-off, because that would suck. Maybe he does it against Anaheim tonight. Maybe he does it against Vancouver tomorrow. I want to see more of this, because I think he really can do positive things for this team, especially offensively, with Adam Fox being out. And when Adam Fox comes back with Robertson still in the lineup, that adds another layer to the offense for this team. It's not just Adam Fox. It's okay. Well, Robertson can, you know, be the secondary offensive guy. Maybe, you know, like let's say in a dream scenario, it's Robertson and Morrow as the pairing, or Robertson plays, you know, top four with whomstever, and then it's Morrow and whomstever playing in the top six. And then you have three pairs with at least one guy that can generate offense for you. And that would just be, you know, even greater. There's a lot of good in that game against Montreal, but Matthew Robertson I want to highlight as somebody that I'm really keeping an eye on moving forward.
It's the type of plot line to keep you interested. It's the type of little breadcrumb to say, okay, if the team's ceiling isn't that high and I'm still going to sit through another 50 games like a sicko, I need things to care about beyond the wins and losses. Matthew Robertson maybe becoming an NHL regular, and even if it's not a long-term thing, even if they only get 200 NHL games out of Matthew Robertson over the next 2 or 3 years, that's better than going out and having to pay for it. That's better than going out and having to trade for it. That's the way you have to look at those last few roster spots. You think about all of the episodes Andrew and I spent in 2022, 3, and 4 complaining about Patrick Nemeth, and Ben Harper, and those types of, why are you overpaying for someone who isn't good? I'm not saying Matthew Robertson is good, but he's cheap and he has the capacity to be good. That's really all I'm asking for. It's why, as much as Berard hasn't done much offensively, I would rather him play than Radish or Brodzinski, because he might be able to be something 2 or 3 years from now. And ditto for Othmann or Perreault, whatever young player you can think of, those are things I want to see. Hell, can we get a Dylan Garand start at some point in the second half of the year? Those are the types of things that'll keep me interested and invested, because it gives me an understanding that, okay, the franchise recognizes that it's probably not going to happen this year, and we need to look towards what the next version of this team is going to be. And I think that's the biggest source of my anxiety about this team, and we can wrap up on this note. They have a few solid pieces who will be here for a while. Fox and Shesterkin should continue to age fine. But beyond that, the top 4 forwards are all old and expensive. Lafreniere, I fear, is a lost cause to some degree. You could convince me about Cooley, Laba, Berard, Perreault. Those guys start continuing to getting better. Okay, that's something I can hang my hat on, feel better about. Robertson, maybe he's a guy for 2 or 3 years. Those are the types of little things I need when your team is in the abyss to feel like the future isn't entirely hopeless.
There's a light, maybe, at the end of the tunnel. Maybe. Yeah. A lot of this, you know, it's tough because a lot of this, again, depends on the team and the fans and everybody that's watching them to rely on certain things happening for this to go well. And I guess you can say that about every franchise ever, but you know, right now, if you look at the depth chart and you go, okay, Robertson's here, he's playing well, that's great. Berard is here, he's not putting up the counting stats, but he's not playing poorly, so that's good.
He's noticeable.
Yeah. He's not a net negative on the ice, which is that's the fear. So okay, that's good. He's not scoring as, you know, what you'd like, but he's generating some stuff, and he puts in a good shift every now and again. Like, he's somebody that you notice is go, okay, well, you know, let him keep doing his thing. okay, Perreault is dominating the AHL as far as, I know, and I mean, I don't want to pretend
as far
to
as
know.
the stats say,
As far as
the
the
counting
stats say, he's doing very well. I can't sit here pretend to be an AHL expert. I haven't watched a whole lot of Hartford or any of Hartford play any type of hockey, so I can't sit here and tell you how good Perreault has looked shift to shift. I'm not here to pretend to know these things. But at least on paper, he's looking like he's, scoring a lot and generating a lot of offense. So that's good. And the argument is, okay, well, why don't you just call him up at that? Like, yes and no. If, I would probably rather Perreault play in the top six than Connor Sheary. But, at the same time, like if you can use at least the first half of this year to cultivate another like half step for Perreault to, and then when he gets up here to have one or two more extra tools in his tool shed and in his toolbox and understand how to play professional hockey a little bit more, then okay, that's fine. But the Rangers do need a couple things to go their way. They need Othmann to do, I don't want to say something because that sounds negative, and that sounds maybe overly negative, but the Rangers have really put in a lot of trust in Othmann, a lot of faith in Othmann, and through multiple training camp, like this was supposed to be Othmann's year to make the team, and he kind of just didn't, and it's objectively disappointing for everybody involved that he didn't do that. And so now after that, all the trade rumors began to swirl, like, okay, well, if he didn't make it this year, then when's he going to make it? Like, this is a first-round pick that isn't an NHL player still. So they need certain things to go right. And, by all accounts, also somebody like EJ Emery, who's allegedly really good, right? I don't know anything about it. Everything that I know about EJ Emery is like, is things that people, that I have heard through other people. I haven't seen EJ Emery. So maybe he's the Noah Laba next year, where he makes the team, surprisingly. No one expects him to be there, and yet he's there. Maybe that's, maybe it's Schneider, if he's still here, and Emery as a pair next season. Maybe it's Morrow and Emery. Who knows? Like, there's a lot of permutations that could happen, but a lot of this still relies on the Rangers needing their young talent to take a step up. They have some good names in the pipeline. Now it's up to, okay, well, if you get up here, can you stay up here? And then we'll go from there.
Because that gives me something to sink my teeth into. I can be a little more, because there's more range of outcomes. Everybody likes prospects because they could become anything. And that's kind of the key to this right now. I basically know what JT Miller, Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, Vincent Trocheck, I would dare say Lafreniere. I know what those guys are at this point. But the capacity for more from the younger guys is what's exciting. We can wrap up on that note. I'll be very curious to see how the guys... Kreider will be received well. I could see a world where Trouba kind of gets it, but I'll be curious to see how that goes.
Trouba's going to get a good ovation.
I'll be curious to see. Those aren't trues. Those are boos. Is that what Sam would say? Those aren't
boos, Joe. They're not boos, Joe. They're trues. Trues.
Yeah. We could go with that. We could call it that. All right, That'll do it for this week's edition of Liberty Blue. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think about Kreider and Trouba coming back tonight, whether or not you're going to give it to them through your TV, like they can hear you or not. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Later.